really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here today on this podcast where I talk a lot about spiritual issues that I am dealing with as a person who is not religious, but focusing on the spiritual aspect of life and the things that really matter on the deep level in life, but that don't require or need a religion in order to be experienced. So I share with you some of my own struggles and trials on the journey, things I'm reading, things I'm learning, what I'm working on, in hopes that it might be helpful to you as well if you likewise are on your own spiritual journey, learning about yourself, going deep into yourself, asking questions, working on healing, and just trying to be the best person that you can be. So that's the purpose of this podcast. Today, I'm going to take you on a little journey with me through a lot of thoughts I've been having lately. Sometimes this happens. I start pondering something that I'm wondering about, and each day something new comes into my awareness that adds to the question I'm considering. And so I'm going to share with you a number of different little stories that have all come together and kind of coalesced into this one message for me today. So to begin with, I'm pondering one of those existential questions that people often ask Google: why is life so painful? And I've been looking at lots of these different questions over this entire year because I find it fascinating to stop and think about it. These are the things all of us are asking and wondering about. And as a disclaimer, the purpose of asking these questions, which this will come up in this episode as well, is not because I have answers or even that I find answers to them. The purpose is just to explore the questions and maybe ask even more questions, but go deeper into the spiritual aspect of life. So do not listen to this podcast believing that I'm going to give you an answer to the question, why is life so painful? But I am going to talk about it from a number of different perspectives. So this whole question for me began because I'm a brand new grandmother, as I may have mentioned before, and I was contemplating childbirth and the fact that it is so painful. That our arrival here on this planet, it's extremely painful for the mother. I'm certain it's also painful for the infant going through the birth process, and wondering, why is that it's painful for us to arrive here into this life? And what does it mean that we come here in pain, and the person who brings us here, who ushers us into the world, is in deep pain, and we ourselves are in pain during that process? And then I heard a story recently about a woman whose husband died 10 years ago, and it made me think about grief and how at the other end of life, there's tremendous pain as well, grief being one of the deepest emotional pains we can ever feel when we lose someone very dear to us. And so what I was told is that this woman whose husband died 10 years ago has been taking antidepressants ever since he died and had never once cried over his death. But she mentioned that she tried to go off of antidepressants at one point and cried nonstop for a couple of days and knew she wasn't done grieving yet, so she went back on the antidepressant, and she's going to take it until her grief is gone. That is her intention. And as As you know, in my other podcast, End of Life University, and here I talk about grief a lot because as a hospice doctor, that's something I deal with often. And I don't judge other people's process of grieving. Grief is unique to each one of us. We each handle it in our own way. We each have different tools available to us for coping and dealing with our grief. So I'm not judging her choice to take antidepressants because each of us must do whatever it takes to survive and to cope. And I have compassion and empathy for her and the pain that she has been in. But I was just reflecting on that choice that she has made. And basically, she admitted that she feels numb when she's taking the antidepressants, and she likes that. She doesn't feel the pain of her grief. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, I also know a father whose daughter died. Now it's been about 15, maybe even 20 years ago that she died. And he has made the choice to never stop hurting. He has stated that he wants to feel the pain of his grief for all the rest of his days, all of his life, and he wants to feel it deeply. He does not want to lose the pain because now that his daughter is gone, he feels that his life is just forever shattered, and he intends to stay in that state of being shattered forever. And so he resists the idea. He would never take an antidepressant because he wants to feel the pain, and he resists the idea that grief is a process or that healing is possible or that grief is something that changes over time or that we move through. He intends to stay in the same place of deep pain forever until his own death. And that's his choice as well. So again, not to judge the choices of either of these two people. It's interesting though that their choices seem to be on opposite ends of the spectrum. And that fascinates me as well. First of all, how diverse we are as human beings and how different our choices become when we're faced with adversity and challenges. And a lot of it comes from who we are. What have we experienced in the rest of our lives? What have we learned? How have we grown? What have we witnessed? And again, no judgment whatsoever, because each of us just has to find our own way. And I think that's one of the crucial messages here. We are each just out there trying to get by from day to day. And so more power to anyone who finds a way that they can survive, who finds whatever it takes to help them get through this, to get up tomorrow morning again and go through another day. So with this backdrop, the question, why is life so painful? Thinking about pain at the beginning of life, pain when a life ends, how we choose to cope with this pain, what we choose to experience. And I guess when we look at childbirth, we could talk about choices there as well, because some women choose to go through natural childbirth wanting to feel all the pain of the birth process. Others choose to get epidurals and other forms of anesthesia so that the pain will be minimized, though they still experience pain. There's no question the epidural takes away some of the most severe pain at the time of the birth, but there's pain prior to the epidural and pain after the epidural. So no matter what, childbirth is still a painful experience, but we do have choices. And so it's interesting to see which choices various people make. So those thoughts have all been going through my head for several days now. And then this morning, I read a daily email that I get from Father Richard Rohr and his Center for Action and Contemplation. He sends out just little email messages to give us things to contemplate. And in this particular email, he was quoting from a book he wrote called The Quest for the Holy Grail, and talking a little bit about the myth of the Holy Grail, something I don't know, I've known about from the legend of King Arthur, but I've never really given much thought to. But this particular story that he told struck me as being very relevant to these questions that have been going through my head. So he tells about one part of the Holy Grail myth, which is the story of the knight Parsifal, or I guess in some myths he's called Parsifal. Parsifal is a young and innocent knight who is going on the quest to find the Holy Grail, which all of the knights are going out to try to find it. There apparently have been lots of different stories in the myths about what the Holy Grail actually is. But one thing that Richard Rohr talks about is the fact that it is ultimately a symbol for the soul, for our own souls, our higher consciousness. And so this archetypal search for higher awareness and for a higher connection with the divine and with consciousness. So that's what the quest for the Holy Grail is all about. But in the story of Parsifal, he one day wanders into a castle and meets a sick old king. And I think he's called the Fisher King in the myth. And speaks with the king, finds out the king is very old and ailing. And the king, according to Richard Rohr in the story, represents the ego and the past, the old ways of doing things, and our old wounds that are buried deep in our unconscious. So Parsifal meets the king, and it turns out that this king can be cured of whatever it is that he's sick with if a wandering knight comes to the castle and asks him 2 questions. But Parsifal, because he's young and a little bit shy and innocent, doesn't ask the king anything. He worries that would be inappropriate. So instead, he ends up leaving the castle and the king and wandering in the wilderness for many years, experiencing many trials and losses. And this sounds like life for many of us, and what many of us have experienced in our lives, wandering a bit, going through various trials and losses, not quite understanding what it is that we're doing or why we're here. But one thing Richard Rohr points out is that Parsifal wasn't ready to ask the king the questions anyway. He needed to wander for a while, and he needed to experience the trials and losses before he would be able to ask the questions. But here's the important part. What are these 2 questions? And according to the myth, the first question that the king needed to be asked is, "What ails thee?" And we could interpret that as, what is hurting you? What is your pain? What are you experiencing right now? What are you feeling? Because again, remember that we are asking the ego these questions. If you look at the deeper meaning behind the myth, we need to ask the ego these questions, and this is the path toward healing. And the second question is that the Fisher King needs to be asked in order to heal is, whom does the Grail serve? And so our more contemporary interpretation of that would be, what does this pain that I'm feeling right now serve? So what am I feeling? What are my wounds? And what does this pain serve? Or who does this pain serve? Those are the 2 questions that have the potential to heal the ailing king or the ego and our old wounds. And so Richard Rohr points out that we miss out on everything if we don't ask these questions. But the whole point is to ask the questions, not to look for the answers. And that sometimes we get mixed up as we're wandering around here through life and dealing with our trials and the pain that comes to us. And we want answers when the real focus should be to ask the right questions. And I think this is something that most of us are a little uncomfortable with because we don't like uncertainty. We actually want answers. We want to know that there are answers, that all of these questions in our heads, all the things people are Googling to ask Google about life, they want to know that there are answers to those questions. And Google is the place you go for answers. So we turn there assuming that we will get hopefully a pithy, concise answer that we can walk away then from these questions. We won't have to ask them anymore because we'll have an answer. We won't have to consider it anymore. But as I said at the beginning, this is not a question that we can answer for ourselves necessarily, but it's still a question that we need to ask. And so I really appreciated Richard Rohr emphasizing that we need questions, not answers, and that we need to focus on asking the right questions, because it's not just any question that we could ask, but it's asking the right questions that will help us go deeper within ourselves, that will help us get deeper into our shadow, our unconscious, the wounds and the pain that are stored there. I've talked about this many times, and it comes up in the journey from ego to soul, that the way we grow in consciousness is to actually confront the pain and the wounds that are within our shadow and bring them into the light and make ourselves more whole by embracing the parts of ourselves that we've rejected. That's how we grow in consciousness. That's how we become our best selves. The people that we were intended to be, or how we realize the potential that we came here with during that very difficult process of childbirth. So again, the questions: what is it that I'm feeling? What pain or anger or wound or hurt am I feeling right now? And why might I be feeling it? How does it serve me? How does it serve others? How does it serve the world, the whole planet, that I'm experiencing this pain right now? And when we are able to ask those questions, what is the pain? How does it serve? Then I think we get beyond demanding to know, how come I have to go through this? I don't want my life to be this way. And so as I contemplated this story from the Holy Grail and the importance of asking the right questions, I thought back again to the two people I mentioned already who are grieving and how they are approaching their grief. And the woman who has decided to just take antidepressants every day forever, I realized, is not willing to ask either of those questions. What pain am I feeling? And how does it serve me or others? Because maybe it's just too much for her. Maybe it's too overwhelming. Maybe it simply would crush her. And she absolutely could not survive if she were to look at those two questions. And in that case, the antidepressant serves as kind of a soothing and numbing agent that keeps her from going there, but it keeps her on the surface of her own life in a way. It keeps her grief and the pain of her loss buried deep inside. It keeps her from going deep within to experience all of that. Again, no judgment. I'm not saying that that's wrong or right or anything. No judgment. Each of us, we just have to do whatever it takes to get by. And I recognize that's what's happening in her case. And when I think about the father whose daughter died 20 years ago, who has decided to stay in the midst of his pain, he's been willing to ask the first question: what am I feeling? What is this pain I'm feeling? In fact, he's been willing to dive into the pain, but he will not ask the second question: what does this serve? How does this serve me or serve others? Because he feels offended by the idea that his daughter's death could have had any sort of positive consequence for him or for others. He cannot allow himself to think that or to go there. I understand that feeling as well, actually. I understand that quite well from my own grief process after my father died by suicide, that in some ways it feels as if it's dishonoring the memory of the person we love if our grief actually begins to lessen or subside or change in any way. And I resonate with that thought and that feeling. And so I understand why this father feels he must stay in the pain. He is not looking to understand how could this possibly serve me or other people. He doesn't want it to. He simply wants the pain to be there every day. So in his case, he's willing to ask the first question, what is this pain I'm feeling? But he is not willing to go further. And again, no judgment. Each of us makes our own choices. We're on our own path, and we're doing the best we can with whatever we have and what we've experienced. But it brought me back kind of full circle in a way. I remember when I was in college and struggling with loneliness and isolation, being away from home for the first time, and really trying to understand what life is about. Since the time I was a little kid, I've actually been on some sort of spiritual quest trying to understand life. And in college, it was the first time I was all by myself on that quest, seeking my answers alone, wandering in my own desert of a sort, and really suffering with it, and not understanding, like, how do I figure out what to do with my life and why I'm here and what is my purpose and what am I doing and where is this all leading? And in college one day, I came upon a verse by Rainer Maria Rilke, which is very famous, so good chance you've heard it before. But this verse, actually, I wrote it down. I read it every single day. And it is the thing that got me through those painful days in college when I wasn't sure what I was doing here or what was going on in my life. Every single day I read this verse. And so in this whole little journey of contemplating why is life so painful, and reading about the myth of the Holy Grail and Parsifal and the two questions, and putting all of that together, I remembered the verse, and I remembered how it sustained me and carried me through my wilderness and my rough time. One of them, there have been many during the course of my life now as I look back, but this was one of the earliest times when I alone wandered trying to find some answers. So I'll read the verse by Rilke, which you've probably heard before in some form or another. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And the line that stood out to me the most back in college was, do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. I think that is where Parsifal was when he was not able to ask the Fisher King the questions because Parsifal wasn't ready to live with the answers or the consequences of asking those questions. He wasn't ready yet. And so that made so much sense to me in college that, oh, I may know this, I may understand this better someday. And yes, indeed, I certainly do, though I'm doing this podcast as evidence that I'm still asking plenty of questions and there's still answers that I'm seeking that I can't live yet. And I'm still trying to live the questions. So I think that is the point of this whole message. We may never know or understand why life is so painful. We know that it is, though. And being brave enough and courageous enough to look at our own pain, to go deeper inside, and to be willing to sit with the questions and not have everything explained to us, not have all the answers, have some things that are just unknown, some questions that we simply have to live with every day. I think that is the essence of this journey. And as life goes on, we may get some of the answers we were seeking when we were 18. We may have some of those answers now, but we have all new questions now. So occasionally some answers may come to us, but always more questions that we're asked to live with every day. And so I'm finding myself comfortable now in this place of not having answers, of living the questions. I mean, that's one of the benefits of living for a long time and being around and seeing a lot and experiencing a lot. And this is probably the first time in my life when I'm okay with having the questions and I'm okay sitting there and not understanding it. And that's what helps me just have compassion for other people who maybe they've figured out a way to cope with their questions and with their pain for now. And if it's helping them get by, whatever it takes for them to survive, I have no judgment. I have only compassion and love for those choices. And that's true for myself. I have compassion for myself. I'm getting by the best way I can too. And same for you. I'm sending to you, anyone who's listening out there, because my assumption is that you're not listening to this podcast by accident or randomly, that in some ways you've been drawn to it or called to it, and that maybe you too are learning how to live with questions and not ask for the answers, but learning how to get comfortable in the unknown. So I'm sending you my love, trying to radiate that out through the airwaves to you, and reminders that it's okay. It's okay to have all the questions in the world and none of the answers. And in fact, that's the very best thing. Just keep living the questions and don't be afraid to ask them. Don't be afraid to ask, what is this that I'm feeling deep inside of me? What is this wound? And how does it serve me? And how might it serve others? So until we're together next week, remember that we're here for love. I guess if I have one answer that I've found in life, I would say love is my go-to answer for everything. Just fall back on that. If there's a way to learn more about love, to live with more love, to bring more love to the world and give it away to others, that's probably the best way to choose. Choose the way of love, the most love possible. And then face your fear and all of that pain that's hidden inside. Be ready, because life will always bring you more questions, and love each and every moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.